are on Yudal and Beis. Sorry for the delay. And we are at the top of the page, 5 lines down. Okay, this goes really to a lot of the discussion. I guess we really should probably introduce this a little bit. We spoke about the system of liens, right? We explained the words mishubodim and lekuchos, right? Remember those words? Mishubodim is property that has a lien on it. Mm-hmm. Typically, when we talk about mishubodim, we talk about property that was purchased. So, for example, I borrow money from Hillel, right? My property now has a shibud to Hillel. Although while the property is in my domain, we typically call that b'nei chayrin. B'nei chayrin means free properties. In the sense that there's no need to execute the lien. You're collecting from me the properties just like you can collect anything that I own. Mm-hmm. The real reason for a lien here is that if I sell the properties to Eric, let's say, then you can take the properties away from Eric. And that's what we call taking from lekuchos. Those properties are mishubodim. Okay, now we get into a whole set of interesting questions, which is really the subject today. The problem here in this story is that let's have a few versions of the same story. So we have Hillel, I got it from Hillel and sold it to Eric. So in a regular story, who collects for me? A debt collector, the creditor, the lender. He's coming and taking away the property either from me or from Eric. What happens if Eric invested money in the property? So he bought the property for $1,000. And he made $1,000 worth of investments. Okay, so the first thing to realize here is that now, when the creditor comes with a $2,000 debt and takes the property, he actually benefits from Eric's work. And therefore, the rule is that Eric can collect back from me the extra $1,000. And we'll get into more details. That payment here, there's a few key words to know. Okay, word number one is shvach. Shvach is the resulting increase in value. Yitzia is the expense. So Eric made an investment called the Yitzia. Yitzia literally means to leave. Yotza, to leave. So Yitzia is your investment. What left the money that you've given away, it's left you as an investment in the field. That's called Yitzia. Okay. And then that Yitzia hopefully, ideally, results in what we call shvach. Shvach is an improvement in the value of the field. For example, Eric built a wall or a fence or whatever it is. That's an investment. It increases the value of the field. He might have planted things. Same idea. Okay, the third critical word to know is called peri. This is a little bit different. So in this case, I got the field from Hillel and sold it to Eric. Eric decided to plant tomatoes. Okay. Now this is one problem to the story, which is I sold the field to Eric, let's say in March, right? And in I don't know, April, May, whatever it is, whenever the time to plant tomatoes is, and I'm choosing tomatoes very specifically because it's an annual, right? It's not a perennial. It's not going to grow again. Clearly, it's the work of Eric here. Yes. It's not anybody else's work. Yes. Okay, so now the debt collector comes in mid-August, and the field is filled with tomatoes. Can the creditor collect the tomatoes as well?
Have they produced?
We'll get to it. We'll discuss. But over here, the difference is that this is not. First of all, the tomatoes are ready to be picked, so they don't really need to be in the field. We'll discuss this more. Same exact story, except that this time, pardon me, Hill, for choosing me for this, but this time, instead of Hill being a regular person who sold his property, which was collected by a debt collector, Hill was actually a thief. We call him a gazlan, and he stole the property from a third party, which is called a nigzal. And the same thing is going on. Same story. Can the thief take away the property, including the stuff that was on it?
I'm a thief in the sense that I'm lending to you.
No. You stole a field.
Oh, okay.
You can't really steal a field. It's a question of how can exels or not exels. Okay. And the other point, also another interesting point here to make is let's instead of planting tomatoes, there were apple trees in the field. And okay, so now let's go back. I borrowed money from Hillel and sold my field to Eric. Now, if I have apple trees, Eric gets to eat the apples in the apple trees. Okay. Now, let's say you come collect it when the field is full of apples. The creditor does not get the apples. Why not?
Because they were the work of.
Because the field was sold. This is an apple. This is what do they call it? An apple orchard? An orchard?
Yeah.
I think it's the word.
Yeah.
An orchard. So the apples in the orchard were legitimately sold to the buyer. The creditor is trying to confiscate it, and his confiscation only happens at the time that it was confiscated. He's totally not entitled to the apples in the fields. Now, the buyer, Eric, we volunteered you to be a buyer.
No.
Okay.
Boy,
Now
it must be hurting something bad.
Now the other scenario is I sold the field that I stole. I stole the field from Hillel and I sold it to Eric. Now let's understand. If the field was stolen, whose apples are these? Hillel's apples. They're the victim's apples. In that case, the victim takes the field with the apples on it. Okay. This is basically the entire discussion for the day. Okay, you can kick off at 5 lines from the top, 14b. Somebody sells a field to his friend. Turns out it's not his. Right? He sold him a Brooklyn Bridge, as they say in English, colloquially. Rav says yesh lemois v'yesh leshvach. Okay.
Sold in the Allenby Bridge.
Okay. Again, so we have Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Shimon steals the field from Reuven, sells it to Levi, right? So Reuven's the victim, Shimon is the victimizer, and Levi is the
buyer.
Levi is the naive one.
Yeah.
He is the one that bought the Brooklyn Bridge. Okay, so what happens? So Rav says yesh lemois v'yesh leshvach. Okay, so Levi put investments in the field. Levi put up a fence. The field was worth $1,000. The fence cost $1,000. Levi's is out now $2,000. So Rav says, yesh lemois, yesh leshvach. Yesh lemois means $1,000 he paid the $1,000 that Levi paid Shimon for the field. Shimon now owes to Levi, and also the $1,000 for building the fence. However, Shmuel says, mois, yesh loy, shvach ein loy. Levi can demand reimbursement for the $1,000 he paid for the field, but not for the $1,000 he paid to put up the fence.
Say it one more time, Rabbi.
Levi, again, so we have Reuven, the victim.
Right.
Shimon,
Are we talking about an improvement to the property made by the unwitting third-party buyer?
Correct.
And then what happens?
We said
when
Levi
the whole
invested.
cost goes to and who gets reimbursed for what?
Exactly. So Levi's out $1,000 for buying. Naive Levi is out $1,000 for buying the field from thief Shimon, and naive Levi is now also invested $1,000 to build a fence. So now naive Levi is out $2,000.
Yeah, multiple levels of mess there.
Okay, so we have a debate here between Rav and Shmuel. Everybody agrees that he gets reimbursed for the first 1,000.
The first 1,000 which went for the
actual property,
Okay.
The debate here is about the money he's out for the fence.
Because of what the improvements.
Okay, but you should mention before we started, we sort of gave a lot of the background between the words of Lekuchas and Shabadim, and this discussion here of Shvach, and we'll assume the other word is Paris. Paris is where the field has actual fruit on it. That's basically the discussion for today. That was the introduction we started with. We're basically starting now about 7-8 lines down from the top of 14b. Okay, they had a question for Rav Huna. Okay, and they were trying to figure out why. What is the reasoning of Shmuel? Pirish le'es hashvach mahu. Okay, so now thief Shimon is selling it to naive Levi, right? Now thief Shimon specifies that if the property is taken away by a victim, then Shimon will reimburse the buyer, naive Levi, for any investments he makes.
Shimon is the guilty party?
Shimon is thief Shimon.
Right, okay.
Thief Shimon specifies in his contract to naive Levi that any investment in the property is going to be is going to be reimbursed should a victim come forward and confiscate the fields.
That's slippery.
What?
That's a slippery.
So now the question is that valid or not? Mahu.
Well-
Let's ask. Time of the Shmuel, the reason of Shmuel is Mishum Delay Pirush, because in the contract there was never a specification that responsibility for investments would lie with thief Shimon. Yes.
Hey, how can the thief execute a legally binding contract for property that isn't legally his to begin with? How can he sell something that doesn't really belong to him?
So first of all, he can't, but he could accept responsibility.
I'm just wondering how the contract would stand up in a court of law if it's something that doesn't belong to him in the first place.
Yeah. Mishum Delay Pirush Racham. Is it because he did not specify that he was taking responsibility on the investments? Over here he did explain it. I don't more, or do we say the reason is time of the Shmuel keeping the less like karka mechzik ribis. Okay. This is broaching the subject of ribis, which we will not go into too much today. We'll just come up briefly again in a little bit. We'll get to it in a later parak, about a month and a half or so. Okay. 1 second. Okay, the reason here is as follows. What happens is when victim Reuven takes back the property from naive Levi, so naive Levi actually doesn't have anything here, right? What it looks like here is that naive Levi gave a loan to Shimon because the money for the sale is sort of like a loan money, right? And what does he get back? He gets back twice as much money. Paid $1,000 for the fields. Yeah, he's getting back $2,000. People don't realize that the other 1,000 is being paid for the fence.
So affect ribis.
So it looks like rivet. It looks like ribis. It looks like he's getting interest. Mechzik ribis. Looks like cash advance here, you know. Okay, Amarlei. So Rav answered yes in Velav, and then he said no. V'Rafi biyade, he didn't know the answer. Okay, Itmar Amar of Nachman Amar Shmuel Mois Yesh Le Shvach Ein Le. If Nachman said to him, Shmuel, you get reimbursed for the property, and you do not get reimbursed in the investment. Even if you specified Shimon, thief Shimon specifies to naive Levi, he's taking responsibility for the investment. He still would not reimburse Shimon. Thief Shimon would still not reimburse naive Levi for the investment. My time, of what's the reason? Keeping the karka ein lai. Since naive Levi does not have the property, it's given back to victim Reuven. Schar ma'osav oimid v'noidel. So then, it looks like the $1,000 that naive Levi gave to thief Shimon is being reimbursed at a higher rate. In English, call that interest. It's ribis, and it's prohibited. Esvei Rav Nachman. Rav says to Rav Nachman, "Ein ma'tzian lachilas peres l'shvach hakais u'lamazan isha avonis." Okay, minachasim mishabadim they take an oil. Okay, so let's give the concept first, and let's go through the details in a moment. So what we spoke about the general concept of liens, of what we call shibud, of nechasim mishabadim, and what we call of taking from the lekuches. Right? You got all those words? Familiar with all those words?
I heard them all. Maybe you should just redefine them in quick order.
Okay. Shibud is a lien.
Right? Okay.
Nechasim mishubadim are properties with a lien that were then sold to
Okay.
buyers called
Right.
lekuches.
To naive third party.
Naive third
right.
parties. And
Right.
then debt collector takes from buyers, naive third parties, same
Yep.
person, and takes it away.
Yep.
Okay, now the general way this system sort of worked is basically as follows. Any type of debt that was incurred that was very well known in public. The examples of such debt is any debt that was written down. Like, for example, somebody gets married. He indebts himself to his wife. 200 zuz. Call that a ksuba. It's a public event. Everybody knows about it. Anyone who buys property from then onward knows they're taking a risk. If the guy gets divorced, it is possible their property will be taken by the woman. Same thing is true of a written debt. Same thing is not true of an oral debt. Yeah? An oral debt nobody knows about. Now let's examine the key factors: ksuba and a written debt. What's in common between both of those?
Written and witnessed.
What?
Witnessed.
But also not only written and witnessed, but also that it's a fixed amount. And the rule is you will never collect an unfixed payment from nechasim mishubadim. So let's explain. A guy gets married, so he has 200 zuz for the ksuba in case they get divorced, right? But as we learn ksubas, we also learned that there are other rules of ksuba. What are some of those other rules? Person's obligated to support his wife and kids. It's an obligation the husband accepts. Okay, well, that obligation is not fixed, right? It's benefit defined. It's not contribution defined. Got to make sure they're full and they have clothing. Whatever that costs. If there's inflation, it's going to be a lot more. If there's deflation, it's going to be a lot less, right? If you happen to own a business, it will be almost nothing. You know, if you own a food manufacturing facility or whatever, or a clothing manufacturing place, it's not. There's no limit to it. It's a net, and therefore we say as follows: there's no way for a buyer to potentially hedge himself against the possibility that the field will be taken. There's no way to know how much it's going to cost him. The guy could own a food factory today, and tomorrow he doesn't. And then it's going to be much more expensive for him. Right? So the rule is, if they tick in an item for the system to work, we can't allow this. There is no taking the chasim shabadim if the payment is not set. It's not a fixed amount.
Right.
Okay.
Not loose terms.
Now let's go through the details. No, not payments that could be any variable amount. Let's go through the specifics. So, okay. Lachilas peros, for eating fruit. What does this mean? This is like we explained in the beginning today, where you took a field that was filled with fruit, right? So, for example, we have, let's say we have robber victim Reuven, thief Shimon, and naive Levi who buys from Shimon, right? So, victim Reuven has an empty field, okay? Thief Shimon steals it. He pushes Reuven off the field, puts some security guards and thugs and bouncers, and they keep Reuven off the field. And then thief Shimon sells it to naive Levi, who plants tomatoes. And there's now the field in late August is filled with tomatoes. Reuven comes with his court and his lawyers and his security team, and they kick Levi off the field and they take it away. Okay, now there's pears, there's fruit on the field. The key thing with pears in this case, we'll have to see the details, but in this case, the fruits are from tomato plants, which means they would not have grown without naive Levi's participation. So therefore, naive Levi gets reimbursed for the tomatoes, the actual ready to be picked tomatoes.
What about his labor and materials?
Well, that's called shvach.
Right.
That's investment. This is called pears. This would be different, by the way, if it was an orchard that was already planted, because in this case it was actually Reuven's trees that grew fruits. It's Reuven's apples. They were always Reuven's apples because he always owned the fields. Reuven's the victim here, victim Reuven, right? Whose field was taken by thief Shimon. Okay, so lachilas peres, you have to reimburse him for the tomatoes. That again is not a fixed reimbursement, right? It could be that there was one.
Reuven or Levi?
The thief Shimon would have to reimburse naive Levi for the tomatoes. Ula shvach kakos is improvements. Whether those improvements are planting tomatoes before they actually grew, or they're building a fence or something like that. They're not fixed. Ula mozan ishav abonis, the obligation to support a woman and her daughter, a wife and her daughters. Minachasim mishabadim from property with a lien. If they take an island for the system to work. Okay, you can't collect from mishubadim. Mishubadim properties, we said, was properties of. If we have in this case, we have, let's say we have a borrower Shimon, lender Reuven, and naive Levi, right? So in this case, naive Levi buys from borrower Shimon, right? That is called mishub. Now the property is mishubadim. It is mishubad. It has a lien on it, even though it's in the property of a lekuchais, naive Levi, to pay back the debt of borrower Shimon to lender Reuven. Right? That's the investment. The investments now of Levi, of naive Levi, would be reimbursed by borrower Shimon. However, not from borrower Shimon's other properties that were sold to other naive third parties, because it's an unfixed amount. His investment is not fixed. It could be a very small investment. It could be a massive investment. So therefore, he can't collect from other naive third parties. He could collect from Shimon. That is naive Levi, who made investments in a property that was later confiscated by lender Reuven. could recoup the money from other properties that borrower Shimon has, but not from other naive third parties. We're good? Uktani meal, and the Brisa mentions l'shvach harkois. You collect for the investments. Mylav, what are we referring to? We said there could be two scenarios for this. It could be naive Levi borrowing from either thief Shimon or from borrower Shimon, right? Must be referring to b'lakach megazlan. We're talking about where he borrowed from thief Shimon. Naive Levi purchased. He purchased the property from borrower Shimon, from thief Shimon, and he made investments in the property. He can recoup the investments from thief Shimon. Who does this contradict? Shmuel, because Shmuel says that naive Levi does not recoup investments from thief Shimon. Right? We said it's like ribbis, because it's like ribbis, because he paid a thief Shimon $1,000, and now he's taking back from him $2,000, and people don't realize the other $1,000 was for building a fence. Yeah. Okay, so Gemara says, no, not necessarily. We're talking about where naive Shimon purchased the property from borrower Shimon, not from thief Shimon. Okay, if we're talking about where the purchase was from borrower Shimon and lender Reuven is the one coming to collect here instead of victim Reuven, right? Victim Reuven would come to collect from thief Shimon. In this case, it's lender Reuven coming to collect from borrower Shimon. So Ema Rachel, let's go back to the first scenario. You can't collect for the tomatoes in the fields. So Gemara says, okay, so now let's go back. We have lender Reuven, borrower Shimon, and naive Levi. Naive Levi plants tomatoes. Lender Reuven comes to collect it in August, full of tomatoes. The law of Shmuel taught, what happens is that lender Reuven collects the field, but he must reimburse Levi for all the tomatoes. He pays Levi for building a fence, for planting tomato plants, but the actual tomatoes that have grown already, he cannot take. He has to reimburse Levi. He has to reimburse naive Levi for bringing about those tomatoes.
Well, and the fence and any other additions he did, right?
So in the case of let's explain. We'll have to explain this, and we'll get to exactly in more detail. In this case, Levi could actually take the tomatoes with him. He can harvest the whole field.
That's naive Levi.
Naive Levi can harvest the field
versus evil Shimon, right?
No, well, Shimon. In some cases, Shimon's a thief. In some cases, Shimon's a borrower.
Okay, in this case, talking about he's a borrower.
He's a borrower. Correct. Okay, Ela Pshita. I was thinking of bringing a whiteboard today. I said I was thinking of bringing a whiteboard.
Yeah,
Ela Pshita.
that'd be a good idea.
Ela Pshita, begoizel v'nigzel. It must be a scenario of thief and with a victim and a thief. Umidiration begoizel v'nigzel. Seifanami begoizel v'nigzel. Okay, so if the first scenario, the scenario where he gets to keep the fruits. Okay. By the way, in this example, we should have given the example of the orchard, the apple orchard. Okay, let's explain again. So borrower Shimon sells an apple orchard to naive Levi, okay. Right? Naive Levi
borrower sells to naive.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
In this case, naive gets to keep the apples legitimately. If the field is later collected, the field is collected without the apples. The apples are kept by naive buyer, Levi. However, in the case of a thief, it's the victim's apples, clearly, because he planted the orchard 10 years ago. So then the victim gets to take the apples as well, and naive Levi cannot harvest the apples.
Well, what are the buyers named Adam?
Thief.
They're Adam's apples.
Okay. So the Gemara says okay, so now if the scenario here is referring to a thief and you get to keep shvach, you get to keep the investment, that clearly contradicts Shmuel. So the Gemara says, no, my area, hakadisa. The first part of the brisa that talks about Paris, that talks about the apples on the tree, That is talking about where you bought from thief Shimon. The second scenario where it says you recoup your investments, that's talking about where naive Levi bought from borrower Shimon. It's two separate scenarios. So Gemara says, the Bryce doesn't say that, because the Bryce explains the shvach karkois for the investment. How does that work? Ketzad, how does it work? Somebody steals a field from his friend, and so you have thief Shimon steals from Reuven, and 1 second. Okay. And now it's being confiscated and being returned to victim Reuven. Because you when you collect, you collect the principal from naive third parties. But shvach can only be collected from Shimon. What's the scenario? That we're referring to Gazlan Mamish, an actual thief. Miman Gavi. Okay, so in other words, the thief steals the property. Thief Shimon steals from Reuven. The Bezdin, the court, takes it away from thief Shimon. Exactly, who is thief Shimon collecting from? Nothing. Nobody. Right? He's the thief, and we're executing judgment against him by taking away the object of his thievery. Who's he collecting from? Nobody. Okay, so what it must mean is, 1 second. Elalav, it must mean thief Shimon actually sold the field to Levi. Vihishbicha, and Levi made investments. And yet the Bryce still indicates that Levi is able to recoup the investments from thief Shimon, clearly contradicting Shmuel's opinion. Yeah? We're together?
No.
The Bryce is indicating a scenario with three people.
Yeah.
Victim Reuven, thief Shimon, and naive Levi. Naive Levi buys thief Shimon's stolen property. Okay, and he makes investments. And the Bryce indicates to us that he recoups those investments from thief Shimon. This contradicts the statement of Shmuel. Shmuel says that a buyer of a thief, naive buyer of a thief, does not recoup investments from the thief because it looks like ribbis.
Tell me ribbis again.
Interest.
Interest. Okay.
And that is prohibited amongst
The sound
Jews.
a frog makes. Come on, listen.
Oh, interesting.
Very good, very good. Okay. Even though the words of the Bryce actually refer to stolen property, they use the word gezel, but actually the scenario here is not referring to a thief. It's not referring to where naive Levi bought the property from thief Shimon. It's talking about where naive Levi bought the property from borrower Shimon. And then we said that naive Levi does recoup his investments. Okay, Toshma, next price. Lachilas peres ketzad. How do you collect for the fruits? Okay, so the Gemara says, what's the scenario? Thief Shimon steals from Reuven. And the implication here is it's being taken away, confiscated from Shimon. When Shimon collects, we'll have to explain this. But thief Shimon would collect the principal, whatever. Obviously, you can't refer to thief Shimon. The Gemara will point it out in a moment. But when the principal is collected, it's collected from Mishubadim, even from naive third parties. And when you collect the value of the fruits, and you collect it from only the properties in the hands of Shimon. Hechidami, what's the scenario? We're referring to the actual thief. Miman Gavi. Why exactly is the thief collecting for stealing a property? Right? Shimon steals a property. Same question as before. Shimon steals a property. Now it's taken away from him. He collects. Who does he collect from? Nobody. He's a thief, and he loses what he stole, which is a good thing. So it can't be actually referring to Shimon. It's referring to where Shimon actually stole the field and sold it to naive Levi. And naive Levi made investments, and you collect for those. And naive Levi is reimbursed for Paris, for the fruits of the property. And he's reimbursed from Shimon. So Gemara says, okay, so what happened here? A very interesting scenario. Thief Shimon stole an orchard, okay, and it was filled with fruit. And then he ate all the fruits. And he destroyed the property by, taking a bulldozer and bulldozing half the property, ripping it apart with a ripper. Okay, 1 second. Okay, and now what happened? The buyer, naive Levi, he fixed up the property. He started growing, getting the apple trees to grow again, and he started repairing the property. So ba nigza ligvais karen, goiv minachosim mishubodim. 1 second, hold on. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Naive Levy bought the damaged field. He didn't put any money into the field necessarily. Okay, we have victim Reuven thief Shimon takes the field and just wrecks the field. He eats the fruit and he steals and he ruins the property physically by running a bulldozer through it. So what happens to Shimon? Shimon
buys it and improves it.
1 second. Shimon purchases. Shimon destroyed the property. Now, and then he sold it to third party. Now Reuven's coming to collect. Reuven's property is not even worth its principal. It's worth less than its principal. That difference can be collected from any one of Shimon's fields, even if he sold the field after the fact. So if naive third party, instead of buying the stolen field, bought a different field, he may still have to reimburse victim Reuven for the damage done to victim Reuven's field, but only for the damage to the actual physical field. The damage to the fruit is only collected from Shimon's properties that have not been sold to naive third parties.
Ooh, that last part. Clarify that last part, please, because the first part seems very obvious. Like if you steal something or you rent something and you decrease its value, then you're responsible for fulfilling that value.
Correct, and that fulfillment will be collected from any of your properties, including properties that you sold after the fact.
In the exception of?
Without exception. If you damage the property, if you damage the physical value of the property, then the reimbursement comes from indebted properties, from naive third parties that purchased other properties of Shimon. They would have to reimburse Reuven the thief. However, in terms of the value of the fruits, the value of the apples hanging on the trees, the payment for those apples would not come from indebted third parties.
So you have Zvulun, who also borrowed from Levi, right?
No. So you have thief Shimon stole a property from Reuven.
Yes, he increased its value,
and that property was worth $10,000, and now it's only worth $5,000.
Yes.
Now it happens to be that thief Shimon also has 5 other properties, each one worth $1,000. And after he steals from Reuven and damages the property, he sold them to somebody else. So Reuven shouldn't be able to collect them. Reuven's allowed to collect them.
Well, so those unsuspecting other purchasers of Shimon's properties, someone comes and says, "Oh, by the way, these were stolen properties, or these properties need to be taken back as
Shimon is a damager. He's a mazik.
Yeah.
And because he damaged property, he now owes money, and that money is collected even from mishubadim, even from property that you purchased. Okay. However, with regard to the fruits on the apple tree, that's only collected from bnei chayrim. It's property that Shimon has that are not mishubadim and haven't been sold to somebody else. Okay, that's one resolution. Rabbi Rafuna says, what happened was thief Shimon stole the property, and thief Shimon and the king didn't get along very well, and the king's agents confiscated the property from thief Shimon. Okay. And in this case, because it has to do with Shimon, the fact that thief Shimon is disliked, which is understandable, thief Shimon is obligated to reimburse the owner for the damage to the property. And what's the rule of reimbursement here? He has to, for the actual property, he has to reimburse them even from mishubadim. For the pears, the fruits on the property, that comes only from bnei chayrim. Okay, so now let's explain it. But he wants to collect the value of the actual property, collects from other properties of Shimon, even if they were already sold. But he can only collect from property that Shimon currently has and hasn't sold. Okay, so now let's explain. Rava gave the example of the guy digging ditches in the fields and eating the fruits, and did not give the example of the king confiscating the property. Why was that? Because the implication here is that when Reuven collects the field, he's collecting the actual field and not collecting money in its place. And according to Rav Huna, he's not collecting the actual field that's confiscated. He's collecting money. Okay. Rabbi Rav Huna le'omer karava. Why does Rabbi Rav Huna not reject Rava? Because arei yotzi tachas yadei be'ena mashma. 1 second. Okay, because Rabbi Rav Huna felt that when you're collecting the value of the property, it means you're collecting the entire value of the property, not just the damage that the bulldozer did. So that's why he preferred a case where the property was confiscated and you're paying the full value of the property. Rav Ashi says, let's start in Katani. The brisa should be read as equivocating. He bought a field full of fruit. He ate the fruit and sold the field. 1 second. Okay. Now the naive so what happened was Shimon ate the fruit and sold the empty field to naive Levi. So naive Levi gets reimbursed for the actual field from victim Shimon, right? And I'm sorry, from thief Shimon. And victim Reuven gets reimbursed for the fruits of the field from thief Shimon as well.
Is there a difference between the piece sold?
When the victim is coming to collect the fruits that were actually on the field, he collects from thief Shimon's actual property. Okay. The Gemara asks, borrow the article for a second here. So Gemara says, "Bein l'Rava, bein l'Rabba, milva al. We have a problem here. The damage that was done to the actual property was done with a bulldozer, right? The damage, or in the case of the confiscation by the king confiscated the property. The problem here is that this type of damage was not written down in a document. So how do people know? How are you able to collect from nechasim mishubadim? In order to collect from nechasim mishubadim, like we said, in order for the system to work, it has to be publicized. So how is anyone supposed to know? Gemara says, and we're referring to a scenario. What happened was it went to court first. Once it goes to court, then everybody knows about it, and then you can collect from the chasim shabadim. And then afterwards, the guy sold the property. So the people that bought it should never have bought it because they should have known the guy was fighting in court over the money. The fruits also, if they went to court already, everyone should know that he's collecting the fruits. The fruit that was actually on the field when it was taken away. So the Gemara says we're talking about a scenario. The guy went to court over the principle, but not over the fruit. So the Gemara says, "My piska, like how odd is that to be?" So the Gemara says, "No, it's actually pretty normal." Typically, the first thing that a person collects is the principle, not the paris, not the fruits. So therefore, it shouldn't be surprising that he first attempted to collect principal and hasn't yet attempted to collect Paris. Okay, tomorrow we'll continue discussion of Shmuel. Okay, have a great day.